Good morning, everyone. Good morning. This is Bill Miles, and welcome to the Chamber's weekly Tele-Town Hall. We're so pleased to have many of you tuning in with us again this morning, and also those who are joining through social media and the Beaufort County channel as well. Today, we're going to talk big picture recovery. We're going to discuss education, some exciting things happening there, COVID-19's impact on our state and region, and what's happening in D.C. this week. As you can see, we've got a lot of ground to cover, and we're going to get right into it this morning. Our first speaker is at the helm of one of the world's leading organizations in travel, and he's considered one of the industry's top minds in marketing and strategic planning. He's responsible for MMGY Global's overall vision and leads the company's $60 million marketing communications practice across 6 countries and 10 different offices. Again, that's across 6 countries and 10 different offices. He's a sought-after speaker and has been featured by news organizations such as Bloomberg, NPR, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, CNN, just to name a few. And when those in the travel industry want to know what's going on and what's on the minds of Americans, we turn to MMGY Global. And when it comes to checking the pulse of what travelers want and where they want to go, MMGY leads the pack on insight that's based on sound research. And this morning, here to share his thoughts on the road to recovery is the CEO of MMGY Global, Clayton Reid. Clayton, we're delighted to have you this morning, and thanks so much for scheduling time for us.
Hi, Bill. What a nice introduction. Thank you very much. Thanks to you and Charlie for including me this morning. I'm going to share my screen with everybody. I've got a deck to walk through, so let me do that very quickly. And we'll move into this. And I'll go through this quickly, but we've some fresh data here to discuss. I am calling this presentation today the Road to Recovery, just because I think we all recognize we want to be on that path. Maybe a little bit about what's going on, how maybe we should be thinking about our guests and travelers, and then some specific things about where we think this goes from here. Let's start with what's going on. I think we can all recognize, at least in my lifetime, coronavirus has been, look, I've been in the industry 30 years. I've never seen anything like this, and I've seen a lot in terms of, real challenges in travel. And if you think about this as a 100-year flood or 100-year occurrence, it's something that's obviously getting all of our attention. I don't know if you know this, but coronavirus is the second most word in the English language online right now. People is the only word that's been used more online than coronavirus. It's on everybody's mind. It's affected either directly or indirectly in the US alone, 60 million people from a health standpoint. And of course, all the concentric circles out from there in terms of how it affects us economically and otherwise. I don't need to tell people on this call how it's affected the travel industry. If I presented this slide even a month ago, these numbers would have been smaller. We're now up over $1.4 trillion in economic loss across the travel industry. The airlines continue to get pummeled. As we all know, in the hospitality industry, significant declines in terms of both occupancy and rate. At one time in April, almost 95% of U.S. citizens were under some kind of major travel restriction, which probably tells you everything you need to know about the travel industry. What's interesting from our research, and this is just from last month, this is half of travelers today are concerned about actually getting the virus. So when you think about that and you think about the idea of safety, getting on a plane, going into a common place like a hotel or a meeting place is something that has a lot of, obviously, at the top of concerns for people. We'll get into a little bit more about this in just a minute, but it sort of goes into this narrative of what we believe are 4 pieces of recovery. The first is as we're in the phase of fear, then understanding, action, and rational behavior. What's interesting is in June, we believe we were emerging from fear into understanding and action. If you look at some of the narrative around bookings, revenues, forward bookings, consumed room nights, there was a move by consumers to move back into the marketplace, and then the narrative shifted suddenly in July, and we're back into what we believe is this phase of fear. So if you think about those 4 phases, what does recovery look like? Here are a couple charts, maybe hard to see, but 3 important things. First, how do global citizens think about the pandemic coming to an end? And you'll see that almost 45% of people see it's going to have to be through a vaccine or a therapeutic treatment. The rest are more through a natural cessation of the virus. But then if you contrast that with the 2 charts below, one, Oxford Economics look at how revenue will come back in tourism. This started back in February into the end of this year. And then if you look at global spending and visits into the US over the next 4 years, and you see that trajectory moving up, but it taking almost 3 years to get back to where we were in 2019. We're a bit more optimistic than that, but I know that Hilton Head relies a lot on both an international and a domestic market. So I think it's important to look at some of those metrics, both in terms of tourism revenue as well as inbound visits and spending. Back to the chart earlier, where 43% of people said that they thought a vaccine was going to be necessary before they move forward. Hyatt actually came out this week and said they're not so sure. And then looking at China, where there's been a very steady recovery without a vaccine. This is a chart from Smith Travel that shows the pretty good increases in room nights through May, and it's actually increased from there. Two things about this chart. One, interestingly, in China, it's the weekends that have been the low point. Midweek is actually performing very well. What we've seen in the US around the recovery broadly is that midweek is really struggling and the weekends are doing very well. I would suspect that in Hilton Head, you've seen some really good occupancy rates on the weekends, as we've seen in many destinations, especially beach and mountain destinations. But midweek, that relies on group business, that relies on, in some markets, heavy corporate transient, corporate FIT business, it's been very difficult. That's the opposite of what's happening in China. But nonetheless, the recovery in China and broadly in Asia has been very positive, where they were about 2 to 3 months ahead of the US in terms of the virus and the sweeping through of the virus. So a lot, including Hyatt, think that's a hopeful sign, which leads me sort of to the first sentiment or the first insight this morning. And that is, we believe, as I said earlier, travel activity will return more quickly than many like CBRE, Smith Travel Research, and others have projected. This is a chart from a wave of research. We're doing every other week a sentiment survey with travelers in the US about how they feel about making a trip, whether it be a business or a leisure trip. This is last week's wave. And you'll see that the latest narrative, which has been negative, turned commercial intent down, but leisure intent remains high. And, well, high is a relative term, but it continues to increase, which we think is a very hopeful sign. Even in the midst of this fear phase, people are telling us they want to travel for leisure, and they're continuing to book. And even when you look at some of the social metrics we look at broadly around traveler sentiment, you'll see, and this is data from just the last 4 weeks, people are continuing to increasingly talk about travel, whether it be about flights, meetings, the intent to travel. We think that's a hopeful sign that while we were really moving forward in June very strongly, and we've taken a step back in the last 4 weeks, there's still a ton of pent-up demand. And we think destinations like Hilton Head are going to be at the forefront of this recovery based on some of those demand generators we're seeing. Even in the airline space, we have several airline clients where they relaxed their restrictions around forward booking and cancellation. They started to see some really nice upticks in booking. In fact, one of our airlines, a low-cost carrier client, was at 75% load factors in June. That's come back a little bit. But again, it tells us that people are now willing to travel. They want to travel primarily for leisure, primarily for short stints by air or by car. And we'll come back to the car travel. But the American traveler has always been resilient. And we see even at this 100-year occurrence, they're resilient again. This is what it typically looks like when we have a challenge in the economy or with terrorism or with a virus. This is data actually from the swine flu coming out of the 2008 recession. And we see that 45% of travelers, these are US travelers, postponed their travel plans. 31% canceled their trip. So that's a typical behavior. We saw the same thing with Zika virus in the Caribbean and with our cruise line clients, that people, some will continue to go someplace, maybe someplace else. Maybe they'll alter their vacations, but a full third say they're going to cancel their trip. And they do cancel their trip. But what I think is really interesting, and this is data from Deutsche Bank. If you look at this, this is what people said they would do over the next 1, 2, 3, 6 months and so on. Everything from going shopping to going to a political rally. But if you take this and strip back everything but the people who said they weren't sure or don't know, you'll find that a large majority of people say in the moment, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go back to this slide and tell you that this group of people who say they're going to cancel the trip, a full third, many of them do cancel their trip, but guess what? They then book very shortly after that. As we move out of the fear phase and into understanding and action and rational behavior, people actually then book anyway. They rebook, and they rebook on a shorter booking window. And we're starting to see that behavior even in this case with coronavirus. So a lot of people are asking us, what about the fall travel season? We believe that there's going to be a decided amount of summer demand that moves into the fall. We're calling it the stretch season. And we do see that happening. This is a look at data from our Fuel Travel Consumer Sentiment Study. And it tells you that, A, people did book at a more slow pace or traveled less over the months or planned to travel less over the next few months. But many of them, as I said earlier, are undecided. A great percentage of them. And we believe those people, as we move away from the narrative into a more positive narrative, will rebook on very short booking windows and into destinations that they can either drive to or they can take a low-cost carrier or a short carrier air trip to. And we think, again, that's a good thing for Hilton Head. This is data from SARS back in 2003. And the only thing I want to say about this chart is it shows to the left of the dotted line a steep decline in room demand. And then to the right of the chart, right of the dotted line, how quickly that demand came back once we got past the narrative. When we saw the SARS media narrative and the outbreak itself slow, both domestic and international booking grew very quickly, really within 6 months. And we do expect some of that same pattern coming out of coronavirus. The other thing I would say, and this comes from another one of our studies, this is the concerns people have around the virus and how it impacts their travel decisions. And you'll see the top 5 are, well, really the top 4 are things we cannot control. The virus itself, travel restrictions, border controls, et cetera. But a number of those below are things we absolutely can control. We know that coming out of a crisis like this, travel inducements, value inducements, communication of brand, communication of safety, things we can control around the narrative drive demand. And I think it's really important for everybody on this call to think about, of the things I can control, how can I communicate to my travelers the best things that will induce them to come to stay with me, to consume my product. This is data coming out of the recession again, and just to say that we know that trips recover faster than spending. People will travel, they'll travel pretty soon back to the levels they did pre-crisis, but they won't spend at the same levels pre-crisis over until a period of time has passed. So we expect lower rates. We expect people to spend less per trip. We expect people to trade on amenities and try to seek values where they might have spent more before until we get past this crisis. The other thing we tell you, and this is also by and large good for Hilton Head, leisure demand returns much more quickly than commercial demand. We're already seeing that in the data today. We've seen that in every crisis before. Those who trade in the leisure space where we know there's a lot of pent-up demand will do well coming out of this. And even in the meeting space, we've been talking to a lot of the aggregators like Helms Briscoe. We've been talking to corporate clients. Meeting planners are rebooking. Some are booking in 2020, though that's a smaller percentage. And that's a lot of association business. We see unmanaged meetings and Smurf business rebooking. But even on the corporate and convention side, we are seeing good booking paces for 2021. And I think for those of you who have group base as part of your business mix, that's a good sign. Second insight, many things change in a crisis, but a lot of things don't change in the long term. I don't think many of you are going to want to continue to see concerts from your home or sporting events from your home as opposed to going to them. I'm pretty sure a lot of us are tired of just working out in our homes or trying to take a vacation through virtual reality. We know that those things are short-term trends and we'll return back to some constants that have always been true. And one of those we would point out is the role of brand. Your own personal brand, your destinations brand, your restaurants brand, your attractions brand is crucial. Not only because people tell us they prioritize their decision-making based on the strength of a brand, but in today's environment, communicating things like safety and security around what your brand is and how you're operating your brand will be really important. And even from a marketing standpoint, we know that a lot of the things we've done over time still are very effective. An example, in the last 3 months, consumption of news, mostly around COVID, but also around the election, has been growing exponentially. Home streaming of content's been growing exponentially. So there have been some short-term shifts in consumer behavior around content and marketing. But we do think many of those things will move back to norms as we move away from the virus narrative. So when you think about marketing, you want to think about some of those real mainstays that have always worked for you. Even around travelers, for years, we've tracked a group of travelers we call the resilient traveler. These are people who will travel no matter what. You see from these stats, people who will travel irrespective of a government advisory or a threatening incident. Those travelers are key for you to look at today. Those who will be early adopters who can help drive some demand for you in the midst of still what is a fear or coming out of a fear narrative. Even what we've been tracking over a number of years now is a constant, and that is people are seeking new kinds of destinations. So for those who've never been to Hilton Head, or for those who've come to Hilton Head but never gone to certain parts of the destination, it's an opportunity for marketers to drive some new demand, drive some new interest. And then I wanted to show this chart on the left. This is a look at mobility around driving versus walking versus taking a train, a bus, or an airplane. You can see the transit numbers down 53% because we're all driving or we're all walking. But that will come back into norm as well. And even with that said, the marketing intents, the marketing behaviors are really the same. The things we want to do to introduce our destination, influence those to come stay with us, to consume our product, and then ultimately to convert. Those things are the same whether people are driving or flying. And it's important to think about that as well. And the last point in this section I would make is we do believe OTAs are going to become more important in the short term. Booking.com announced today they're laying off quite a few people, but don't let that confuse you that Expedia and Booking will still both be incredibly influential. And we think more influential from a marketing standpoint because they're natural aggregation points for travelers. Third insight this morning, these shift in market conditions, I think are important to lean into as a destination or a marketer. We know, to my point earlier, in our latest study, 72% of travelers say they feel safest in their car. They're in control. And Hilton Head's obviously a good destination for drive traffic as well as it is air traffic. But thinking about the fact that people want to be in a safe environment and they think of their car as a very safe environment, and then thinking about how that drives leisure demand over time. We are already seeing in the data that people are building out from their homes the intent to travel. They're staying in their neighborhood, they're vacationing in their own city, but they're starting now to drive up to 300 or 400 miles for a leisure event. We've seen a lot of that. We saw a lot of that in June and early July. It's come back a little bit, but we would expect it to return. And eventually people will bounce out to well beyond their neighborhood and their city. On the group side, as I mentioned earlier, if you're in the group space, thinking about SMERF and unmanaged social group business, small business, and then eventually you'll get back into big conventions, corporate travel, which we think could be 18 months away. And even from an advertising standpoint, things are changing about the way you're communicating today. Thinking about introducing safety messages into your marketing. Thinking about where you're putting your messages side by side with news coverage that maybe isn't so pleasant or positive. Those are all things we as marketers have to think about in this environment. Last insight for today, and I think everybody on this call certainly understands this. The perception of clean is vital. It's not only in our surveys that people tell us, almost 9 in 10 tell us that cleanliness will be an important factor in how they select a travel decision, but they want reassurance around sanitization. Today, it was interesting, Southwest announced that they're no longer going to wipe down seat belts and seats, but they're going to continue to wipe down bathrooms and trays. And I'm not really sure how that's helpful, but nonetheless, they're continuing to send this message of clean. It's an expensive proposition, but we think it's incredibly important for all destinations and all marketers to think about that message of clean. And you're seeing it across the industry with partnerships with everybody from Mayo Clinic to Clorox and how that's being communicated. The other thing I wanted to point out is, and many of you may bundle travel insurance into your products. I know a lot of golf packages have travel insurance, as do hotel packages. We're seeing a 6,800% increase in our survey of people who want to buy travel insurance as part of their trips, just to give them that reassurance. So if you're not already, you might think about packaging some kind of travel insurance product like Berkshire Hathaway Travel Protection or something like that into your packaging. This is a slide on what people feel safe doing today. This is from our late July study. And you'll see that it varies quite a bit. But good news, going to the beach is one of the higher metrics. Going to a park or being outdoors is one of the higher metrics. Golf is actually off the charts in terms of both safety and demand right now, which is good for Hilton Head. So just interesting to see how that varies. And there may be many on the call who are operating a hotel versus a shared accommodation. This is a study from late June, which told us that on a slight basis, people preferred staying in a vacation rental versus a traditional hotel. The calculus was, I'm in a smaller environment with fewer people, therefore I'm safer, versus people who said, I'd rather be at a hotel or resort because I know they're going to clean it properly. In a month, that actually shifted, interestingly. We now have 64% of consumers telling us they prefer to stay in a global hotel chain. Previously, they would have said a shared accommodation or an independent hotel. Now they say a chain because they believe their safety is better taken care of. So I'm giving you both sides of that equation because I'm sure there are people hearing this that are on both sides of that equation. I'm going to close today, and then I'm happy to take questions, Bill, if you'd like. In June, we saw 7-point increase in travel intent from May. Unfortunately, at the end of July, we saw a 4-point decline in travel intent. That's across both leisure and business. My challenge today is to say, what does that look like for August through December? Our research team believes the demand will continue to increase into the fall, and in fact, we could have substantial fall demand. Again, based on what happens with the virus, but it's our point of view that there is a ton of, especially leisure pent-up demand that will manifest in the fall, at this stretch season. People who wanted to travel in the summer, who couldn't, and who will now travel in the fall. And that includes families, many families who we believe will have school at home and who will want to take their kids out of the home to have some kind of educational travel or just be away from that environment. So these are some of the action steps just to summarize today. I think I pointed out, pay attention to travel sentiment, try to pay attention to what travelers are saying about how they want to travel and when they want to travel. For a long time, people were talking about hopeful messages. We think it's time to move into inducements and actual offers because people are traveling. We believe marketing starts locally and moves its way out, that if you're in the corporate space, you should move away from corporate transient and big corporate group into SMERF and association business. Good brands remain aggressive in the marketplace and continue to talk to their customers, whether it be on a safety protocol or whether it just be about the brand itself. Those are going to continue to be important. I know that co-op programs are part of both South Carolina and the whole think about marketing. Participating in those programs is really important. And then this idea of safety and brand will always be important. So that's what I want to share today. I don't know if we have time for questions, but I'm happy to take some if you'd like.
Clayton, thank you. That's incredible information. We could listen to you all day. I've got time for a couple questions. The first one's coming from Thomas this morning. And Thomas is asking, what makes the undecided traveler in your chart decide to travel?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in this case, our last survey tells us there are 3 things that drive them to travel. 1, an inducement of some kind. Whether we like it or not, consumers in a crisis expect us to give them a discount or a value. So the inducement's number 1. 2, as I pointed out several times, the idea of safety. How can we make sure you're taken care of when you travel? And then 3 is explaining what the unique experience is or how you might be a unique experience around the crisis itself. That's why I said earlier that beach and mountain destinations are performing extremely well right now because people believe that's a safe environment to be in. So tipping what your product looks like to that, I think, is really going to be important based on what consumers are telling us.
All right, thank you. Next question comes from Cooper, and Cooper is asking, social gathering is a big part of travel, from family reunions to stadium events. Thoughts and insights on how this will look for us moving forward.
Yeah, this goes to that slide I showed, whether you think a vaccine is necessary to make that happen. 43% of Americans tell us the vaccine's required for safe travel. You know, it's interesting when you look at what's happening in Europe. We have a lot of business in France, and they are having a lot of that kind of business right now. We have a client who has villas in France that are completely sold out for the summer. A lot around families. If you know the French market, you know a lot of that's about family retreats. So in Europe, we're finding they're more comfortable with it. Definitely not comfortable with it in the US right now. And in fact, I would suggest there's a fair amount of shaming going on around anything you do in a large group, weddings being canceled, et cetera, et cetera. The question is, when will that tip over? We still believe that will be in the fall, before a vaccine, but as the infection rates continue to slow and as we get into a narrative that's a little bit more optimistic.
All right, Clayton, one last question this morning, and that's coming from Deb. And Deb is asking, what can brands do to best flex to these changes due to COVID-19?
Yeah, it kind of comes back to the basics of listening to your customer. We found a lot of our clients who are not spending as much in advertising are spending just as much time on social media and in public relations and crisis management, making sure that they're talking about why their brand is empathetic to the customer. I said earlier to the first question, empathy sometimes comes in the form of a value or a discount, but it also comes in this notion that you just understand travelers have anxiety. And I think the brands that are most empathetic, the ones that flex to this moment in time, over time will have more business and shift share from their competitors. At least that's what the research tells us.
Clayton, thank you. It's been incredible time with you this morning, and we really appreciate you joining us and look forward to talking with you further later on. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker this morning, we're fortunate to have with us, and we know he has limited time, and that's Dr. Frank Rodriquez. Dr. Rodriquez, we know you had a school board meeting last night. Some decisions were made, and so we look forward to hearing from you this morning on those decisions and other things.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Bill. I appreciate the time and the opportunity to be with you here today. This has been certainly a difficult decision for us to make because I know that the impacts, are certainly reaching, and I know they impact many of you in our business community as well. And so, I want to just begin by sharing with you that, we've been reviewing the metrics that we get from DHEC in terms of they've been designed for schools to utilize in looking at the virus and the spread of the virus. Over the past 6 weeks, we've seen the COVID-19 conditions simply not improving in our community, and we've been planning for several types of openings, right? And the fact that they've been getting worse as the weeks have gone by. Last week, Beaufort County, as you know, recorded 113 infections in a single day, and half of our county's 43 confirmed deaths occurred in July. Our team has given this situation careful consideration, and as a result, our district is going to temporarily adopt a full virtual educational model to teach its 22,000 students when school reopens on September 8th. I think it's important to note that here in Beaufort County School District, we have over 166 teachers who could walk tomorrow. They're at retirement age and they could walk tomorrow. Our teaching staff has indicated they are very, very concerned, certainly about the virus as well. We have 46% of our employees that are either at risk themselves or caring for somebody who is at high risk. And so we've given this all careful consideration, our students as well, and an educational format. This morning, we're going to stream a press conference just after I get off of this Zoom call on the district's Facebook page, and I encourage our families, teachers, and communities members to tune in. I want you to know, first and foremost, that it is my desire to return to face-to-face instruction, and do that as soon as possible. But before that can happen, safely, conditions must be safer, I think, than they are today. With the current infection rates, the question isn't really if a child or a teacher is going to be infected. It's more a matter of when. Given our currently high infection rates, students, our employees, and all of their families, I think, deserve our advocacy and protection from that potentially harmful conditions when we would be bringing large numbers of people into a specific area for hours on a daily basis. They represent the best of who we are as a district, and we will do our utmost really to safeguard their health and well-being. I want you to rest assured that we're going to be continuing to monitor the metrics because it is our desire to return to face-to-face instruction when it is possible. We as a district, we've been planning for both face-to-face and virtual instructional options for several months, really holding out hope that we'd be able to accommodate families, that preferred an in-school option. However, delaying the reopening decision, any further makes it really difficult for our schools to plan and to organize and to open. And additionally, if we find ourselves in that same situation, then it makes it very difficult for our families to plan as well. The shorter that runway is to that September 8th start date. So I think that's the basis on the decision. I think what we're focusing in is making sure that our students are going to have excellent virtual experience at this juncture, and that it's going to be superbly improved from what we had to do hastily from one day to the other in the spring. And so I really think that we've gone out and wanted to secure a better virtual experience for those families who wanted wanted to choose virtual at this time and just simply weren't comfortable. When I can tell you that we've had over almost 16,000 registrations that have come in already, and it's really been right around 45% of those families were already choosing virtual instruction. So what we're able to do is to provide that same much improved virtual program and instruction to all of our students. The reopening of our schools safely is an endeavor that I think really requires all of us in our community to work together to lower the results on the metrics. I mean, currently we are high in all three categories. To give you a picture of the metrics that we're asked to look at, is a 2-week incident rate that is at 616.8. That puts us in the high category. That's triple the number that we would need to be at to drop from high to medium. I think the other thing is that the trend in incident rate is also high. And then the third metric is the 2-week percent positive rate that is at 20.8. That is more than double what it would need to be for us to move from a high to a medium rating. So it is important, I think, for all of us to work together on this and to follow the recommendations that are out there, regarding masking and physical distancing. And the sooner we can reduce those infection rates, I think the sooner we can safely reopen schools. And I do know that's impactful on everybody. It weighs heavy on me, I can't stress enough that resuming face-to-face instruction is our goal. And so that is ultimately where we want to be, and where we want to be sooner, rather than later. And so I thank you for the opportunity. I'll have a few minutes to take some questions if you like, Bill.
No, that's terrific. Yes, thank you, Dr. Rodriquez. The first question this morning comes from Teresa, and Teresa is asking if the school is going to virtual, is there a possibility that they can start earlier now?
We were looking at that, and I think I don't think we can start earlier. I think there are several things that are still, being put in place, and I don't think that it is something we can start earlier. That is a great question. We've been wrestling. We were wrestling with that as well.
All right, thank you for that answer. The next question comes to us this morning from Susanna, and she's asking if you could please consider having various teaching shifts throughout the day. For example, morning, afternoon, and evening shifts and weekends to accommodate all working parents that have to show up in person to their jobs, but will also need to monitor and supervise the new online education of their children, especially the little ones. In essence, she's saying virtually learning can happen at any time. Is that a possibility?
We're going to look at the flexibilities that we can make available. I think one of the challenges that we run into is I think many of you run into those too, but we'll work at it as well. But it's a matter of coordinating where our teachers are in terms of certification, where our students' course requests are, how those all fit together within a general master board within schools. And so we will work to try to provide as much flexibility as we can. I think that we're also working with local partners that also provide care in smaller settings and smaller groupings. to see what they are able to do or looking to do. So we're looking at trying to be as flexible as we can be. So that's our intent. We know it places hardships on everyone, so we're trying to do that and be as flexible as possible.
All right, last question for you, because I know you need to run, Dr. Rodriquez, is from Jody. And Jody's asking, when the rates drop, how long will it take to ramp up for schools to open again?
Well, I think, once we get schools open, our attention is also going to be on having, a ramped up plan for that. My hope is that we can get those down sooner and we can get our students back in school. But I think what we'll have to look at is, and we're going to do that, is whether it's a phased-in approach over several days, or there's a host and a variety of ways I think that we need to look at it and make sure that we have the best one available. But in terms of a timeline, I don't anticipate a long timeline. I anticipate being able to move in that direction, because we're going to continue to prepare. That is our goal, is to get our students back to face-to-face instruction. So anything that can be done to mitigate that time frame, we're certainly going to work at that.
Dr. Rodriquez, know you need to run. You mentioned you'll be doing a Facebook Live here coming up. If anybody else would like to jump on and watch that, welcome to do so. So thank you for being with us, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye. We'll continue on with education now. We'll look at what's going on at USCB, and we're fortunate to have with us the Chancellor, Dr. Panu. And Dr. Panu, know you're on a short time frame again this morning. This morning, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Bill. As Dr. Rodriguez indicated, these are very challenging times for all of us, as we must make decisions that both reflect the realities in our communities, as well as the circumstances for each one of our institutions. Our folks have worked really hard to both plan and prepare for this fall, and really guided by some key principles, including the fundamental principle of health and safety for everyone, academic excellence, sustainability of our plans, and real care for our community and our people. And given all of the current circumstances, we have developed several plans. And the first one that we are working on right now is to have instruction beginning on the 20th of August. And we would have our classes beginning at that point. We would do away with the fall break and hope to conclude by Thanksgiving, so that after Thanksgiving, students do not need to return on campus and could complete exams and other assignments from home or from distance. This plan that we currently have, we have 8 different modalities that we will provide instruction in, ranging from face-to-face to purely online, and several modalities of delivery in between. I want to make sure that everyone understands that our plan is compliant with DHEC and with the CDC recommendations. And we have in place critical issues related to protection, cleanliness of spaces, and policies around masks, social distancing, and policies around tracing, contact tracing, are all in place. And we've reduced the capacities to our classroom to about a third for those classrooms in which we'll be able to conduct some face-to-face instruction. Our protocols are in place for cleaning and emphasizing the behaviors that we know are going to be absolutely critical for everyone's protection is both encoded in policies that will be enacted as well as in other mechanisms for controls for those kinds of things. We are providing access to health services, and we're making sure that we are making provision to protect the populations in our community that are most vulnerable. And those are all part of what we have enacted and put in place. And we're looking forward to the next step. I do want to emphasize that our plan calls for a great deal of agility and flexibility. As you know, conditions are constantly changing. We're monitoring the data, as Dr. Rodriquez indicated. It's important for each circumstances to consider their internal capacities. We've set aside rooms for quarantine. We've set aside spaces for isolation. And these are all part of the metrics that go into helping us determine the triggers, if you will, for shifting plans and going into a different alternative to what we have indicated and planned. So here we are. We are still, as I indicated, in a planning process, continuing to plan while we have a plan in place to ensure that that we are responsive. So I'll
Thank you,
take
Dr.
any questions that may be there. I'm sorry for the short time that I'm under, but I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Panu. And a couple quick questions before we let you run. Ellis is asking, when is move-in day for the students that will be living on campus?
So we're stretching our move-in days to ensure that we don't have much crowd at any point in time, but they're beginning next week. And particularly for first-year students, I think it's on the 15th, 16th, and 17th.
All right, thank you. And one last question for you. I know you need to run. Will the cafeteria be open for students?
We have in place a very different approach to serving food. So it is open from the standpoint of the services that we'll be providing, but it would not only be social distance, but a lot of box services will be in place.
Dr. Panu, thank you very much, and we'll catch up with you again real soon. Good luck getting all the students back on campus.
Thank you.
Thank you. In previous calls, we've certainly been fortunate to have senior level executives with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce join us. That's no different today. As we know, they're the world's largest business organization and wield incredible power in Washington as the voice of business. When they speak, Congress and the President are listening, and so is the Hilton Head Island Bluffton Chamber of Commerce. And we're proud to have with us this morning Nathan Morris. Nathan is the Vice President of Legislative Affairs with the U.S. Chamber, and certainly has ties to Bluffton and to Hilton Head Island. Nathan, we're glad to have you on the call with us this morning. Somewhat of a welcome home to you.
Well, I appreciate the chance to be with y'all. As Bill mentioned, I actually grew up in the area and I graduated from Hilton Head High, so it's fun to be able to visit with my hometown chamber. Bill and his team asked me to speak a bit about coronavirus and liability issues. And one of the things that we're hearing from around the country is that businesses are very concerned about lawsuits that could come out of the coronavirus and the impact it could have on them moving forward. It's something where we're seeing a lot of litigation. We're tracking over 1,000 cases just on issues that are important to my division within the chamber. Some law firms that are tracking coronavirus litigation are seeing 4,000 plus lawsuits already. And I think it's important as people think, no, that doesn't sound like a lot. In context, it is, because around the country, a lot of courts are closed. There are courts that aren't accepting filings, that aren't working, that aren't operating. And so this is the tip of the litigation iceberg. And there's the threat for a really crushing wave of lawsuits to come over the next year to 2 years. And so it's something that we've been working around the country on, trying to put in place reasonable protections against lawsuits that are timely, that are temporary, and are very targeted. And it's something where I think there's been a lot of interest. 30 states have acted on this. South Carolina, unfortunately, is not one, although your legislature is coming back in September, and there's been a proposal introduced that may be taken up. And we'd certainly encourage your legislature to give a hard look and move forward to the governor. In comparison to other states, South Carolina is lagging in that regard. Immediate neighbors, North Carolina has passed 2 separate pieces of legislation that will limit lawsuits against businesses, colleges, hospitals, doctors, nurses, and others in their state. And they started by protecting essential businesses and essential employees, and they've since gone back and expanded that to everybody who's open during the pandemic. Georgia has a very good piece of legislation in front of its governor now that would provide similar protections, but also in the event that you're at a hotel or a large venue, protect you if you offer certain warnings to your customers before they come through your doors. Regionally, Alabama, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi have all acted in the South. Tennessee has a special session starting on Monday. So there's a lot of momentum for this. And it's important, I think, to note that it's bipartisan. The governors of Louisiana and North Carolina are Democrats. So there's not a Republican-Democrat divide on this. There's a recognition that lawsuits that arise from COVID could be very threatening to businesses. And I think universally there's acceptance of the idea that lawsuits shouldn't be just taken away, but businesses need to be protected from frivolous or very aggressive litigation. It's a pretty common tactic for the trial bar to file lawsuits that are of questionable merit because they know that they're expensive and that a lot of small and mid-sized businesses in particular can't afford to defend themselves in lawsuits. And so they'll pay to make the lawsuit go away, even if they really aren't at fault for whatever has been alleged. In the coronavirus context, there are a lot of different things that could incite litigation, but we're especially looking at exposure, where someone claims that because of a business's actions or failure to do something, they were exposed to the virus, and that either made them sick or made them decontaminate their property or force them to go into quarantine in a way that hurt them economically. Also looking really seriously at product issues. I think this is maybe a little less significant for Hilton Head, which is so focused on tourism and the service industry economically, but around the country, a lot of businesses are changing what they make in order to produce protective equipment. And when they do that, they're inviting, unfortunately, some lawsuits as well. Finally, healthcare is a really big issue. Doctors, nurses, nursing homes, assisted living facilities around the country are facing shortages of PPE, sometimes staffing shortages, and they're having to make very difficult decisions about how to use their resources in a way that's most protective of both their employees and the populations they serve. And so protecting them from lawsuits as they do that is an important, we think, idea. And finally, employment law. We're starting to see around the country a lot of cases by employees against their employers. Some of them are saying, I have a high-risk health condition, I shouldn't be forced to come back to work. Some are saying, I have a high-risk health condition, but I want to come back to work and my employer won't let me. So it's on both sides of the spectrum, and we're looking for protections for employers who follow guidelines and do what public health authorities are suggesting in that respect. Generally, it's really important that liability protections be keyed, we think, to guidance. The idea here is to protect businesses that are doing the right thing, anyone else that's doing the right thing. If you're following public health guidelines and you're making a credible attempt to do what you've been told is the right thing at the time, and at the time is important. For a while, we were told don't wear masks. Now we're told to wear masks. We're being told to use certain disinfectants, and there's news reports that maybe we're over disinfecting things. So it's important to businesses that at the time of some alleged exposure or damage, that if they were doing the right thing, they were doing what they were told was the right idea and following public health guidelines, they not be subject to suit. It's something where if there's been gross negligence, recklessness, wanton misconduct, or a willful act that caused harm, our goal would not be to protect against that. And most states that have acted on that reflect that standard. So if you follow guidelines, you can't be sued unless you did something that was grossly improper. At the federal level, there's quite a bit of discussion of liability protections as well. We think that's extremely important because a federal standard, a federal floor that will give similar protections to everyone throughout the country will be helpful to the economy. It gives certainty to businesses, especially since a lot of businesses and a lot of business partners are going to act across borders or market across borders. So federally, there's been legislation introduced by Senator Cornyn from Texas with support from Senator McConnell, who's the Senate Majority Leader, that would address those four key areas: exposure, products, healthcare, and employment law. It's included both in the HEALS Act, which is the broader Senate package for the Phase 4 COVID relief efforts. That's obviously being negotiated very closely with the House and with the White House. There's also a standalone piece of legislation called the Safe to Work Act, and I'd be happy to send to Bill and his team copies of that for anyone who'd like to see it. And it works by providing a federal standard, and then if states want to do more or address things that are unique to their situations, unique to their state, unique to the environment, unique to their legal systems, or unique to the way the disease is appearing in the state, they can do that and offer more protections or additional protections that are suitable for their economies and their circumstances. It also would be temporary. So the federal proposal would expire in 2024, the liability protections. And that's consistent with some existing federal law that applies for respirators and other products that are being used in the COVID response. So the same period of protection for everybody as there already is for pandemic equipment that's federally protected. And in terms of how it would work, it also would offer really important procedural protections. Like I said, one of the biggest problems with litigation is it's so expensive. And so the federal bill would apply uniform national standards, move a lot of cases to federal courts, where there'd be more consistency and more predictability in outcomes. It would also require people who file lawsuits to really clearly say, this is where I was, this is how I believe I was exposed. These are every other place or every other person that I was or could have been exposed. It would require them to include some documents that are signed by a doctor that speak to the condition they developed if they say they were profoundly ill. And it would also put in place some protections to prevent trial lawyers from trying to run up the cost of lawsuits through something called discovery, where you have to turn over documents. It can be very expensive to search emails, and especially in the remote work environment where so many people are dispersed and working on personal devices, that's a concern that if there's a lawsuit and there's demand for a lot of information, that itself could be very expensive, even if the lawsuit isn't really a very strong suit to begin with. So there's a pause on that very expensive procedure until the court's been able to look and say, is the legal claim here even a good claim? So in terms of next steps, I'd urge everyone who works with Bill and his team, your voices are very important. It's important that both at the state level and at the federal level, your representatives hear that liability is a concern for you. I know that it is, because I've talked with Bill and his team about this, about business examples trying to open that. And I think that you're seeing at home the same issues that companies around the country and colleges and others around the country are facing, which is they have a really difficult choice. They can open up, and they need to do that because they need revenue. They need to show their customers they're able and willing to serve them. They need to build confidence that they can operate safely to begin welcoming folks back in and operating in a regular way. But as they do that, they have the specter of, what if someone says I made a mistake? What if someone second guesses my decisions? What if someone says I could or should have done more, even though I followed all the health guidelines that were presented to me? Will that lawsuit crush my business? And it's a real fear. Businesses are choosing to open because they have to do that to remain open in the future. But they're concerned about what opening will mean if lawyers come after them. And it's a problem that we can fix. And it's a problem that other states have moved to fix. And I think South Carolina has a chance to be an important part of this discussion and debate moving forward.
Nathan, thank you so much. A couple questions for you. First is a comment. We're just wanted to make you aware that we're in weekly and daily contact with our legislative delegation, supporting the supporting business and things coming from the U.S. Chamber. So we appreciate your leadership on this. The first question we have for you this morning Nathan, is if a lawsuit was filed against a business already, would those protections be retroactive to the start of the pandemic?
Under the federal proposal, yes. The federal proposal would be retroactive to December 2019, which is the first time anyone had really heard about COVID. And so it would cover essentially any COVID-related lawsuit that has already been filed or could be filed. And that's important because even if someone says, I was injured in, say, March of 2020, in most states under this federal proposal, they would have a period of time to actually gather information and file their lawsuit. So it would apply to every cause of action, so the ability to file a suit starting in December of 2019 and running until currently October of 2024. And if the pandemic protections for countermeasures like masks and respirators are extended, so would the other protections be.
Next question comes from Kelly, and Kelly is asking this morning if business liability protections were passed on the federal level, would South Carolina lawmakers still need to take any action for developing state policy?
Yes, and I think that the reason is that the federal proposal is important, and if enacted, would create uniform standards and a floor. But there are some things that the federal law just can't address. For example, state employment law. The federal bill would address a whole bunch of federal labor laws, OSHA, Fair Labor Standards Act, Americans with Disabilities Act, but it wouldn't address state level law. And so there would be some areas where South Carolina would need to, if you've created the ability to under state law sue or litigate, you would need to deal with that at the state level.
All right. Another question this morning comes from Hannah. And Hannah is asking, have there already been lawsuits filed against companies for COVID-related illnesses? And if so, are they, assuming they are, but are they similar to workers' comp claims?
There are. The workers' comp question is a very good one. A concerning trend around the country is that there are some states that are starting to assume that anyone who has COVID was exposed at work and give them access to workers' comp. From the U.S. Chamber's perspective, if a state's workers' compensation system covers contagious diseases and it's something where the employee can show they were exposed, they should be able to make a claim. But to assume that everyone who is sick was exposed at work, especially when we know now, and we've heard earlier in this call that there's fairly substantial community transmission in communities throughout the country that's not work-related, to make that assumption could be dangerous and pretty expensive for employers. So that's something that we're looking at. But in terms of suits that have already been filed, yes, there have been a lot of lawsuits filed. And like I said before, there will be many more because of how the litigation system works. There are suits already about exposure and alleged injury. And we're also seeing a lot of suits over masks and mask policies. There's a single grocery store out in Western Pennsylvania that's got now 4 dozen lawsuits over masks and whether they should or should not have their employees and customers wear them in their stores. And that's a huge drag. You've got a company that's trying to do what their public health authority is saying is the right thing to do. And in response, they're going to spend tens of thousands of dollars litigating. And that's not where we should be.
All right, Nathan, thank you so much. I hope next time we're able to see each other in person. And but thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're delighted, and you need to come back and see us again on Hillnet Island in Bluffton soon.
I hope to, and look forward to it. Thanks so much for the chance to be with you guys today.
All right, thanks again. Our final speaker this morning is our weekly update from DHEC, and we're delighted to have back with us Dr. Michael Kacka. Dr. Kacka.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you again. So as usual, I'll just provide a brief update on the numbers here. So for the past week for the state of South Carolina, we're reporting 9,884 confirmed and 197 probable new cases of COVID-19. This brings the total number of people with the disease in the state to 93,604 confirmed cases and 586 probable cases. For Beaufort County in the past week, this includes 552 new confirmed cases and 2 probable cases in the last week. So the totals there now are 3,732 confirmed and 10 probable cases. For the Hilton Head zip codes 29926 and 29928, 61 new cases were reported for a total number there of 679. And for the Bluffton zip codes 29909 and 29910, 121 new cases were reported for a total of 1,164 cases. So overall, we're seeing a better trend this week. The state of South Carolina, Hilton Head, Bluffton, and Beaufort County all have seen a decrease in their weekly case counts. The 552 new cases reported for Beaufort County is lower than the 600 from the week before. The 61 new cases for Hilton Head in the prior week is lower than the 131 from the week prior. And the 121 new cases for Bluffton is lower than the 231 reported for the previous week. Unfortunately, today we're also reporting deaths in the past week of 269 confirmed deaths in the state and 13 probable deaths. This brings the total number of people confirmed to have passed away from the disease to 1,774. There's also been 73 probable deaths related to COVID-19. There's been 13 additional deaths confirmed in individuals in Beaufort County, and the total there is at 47. There's one additional probable case related to Beaufort County, bringing the total there to 3. So new deaths in the state reported decreased in the last week compared to the previous week from 302 new confirmed deaths, from 369 deaths in the previous week to 302 in this most recent week. So saw a decrease there. Beaufort County did see a slight increase from 6 deaths to 13 deaths compared to the week prior. Unfortunately, the death numbers do tend to lag behind the case numbers. So last week I was asked for specific data related to deaths in Beaufort County. So our website soon will begin featuring a county dashboard with more specific data for each county. I had thought that this was actually already available, but I guess it had actually been delayed due to technical issues. We do have specific data release policies, and we have to ensure that we follow them to make sure that we don't release information that would identify an individual. But we do want to provide additional information to local counties so that they can better understand how COVID-19 has affected their community. And I did want to comment on the tropical storm real quick. We were fortunate not to be overly adversely affected by it. There was a lot of concern about how this might affect COVID-19, and I will share that that's one of the first questions we asked when this all started was what we were going to do if we had a hurricane that came through. So we had been working on plans this whole time of how shelters will manage people coming through to make sure that they're prepared. They can identify people who may be able to spread the virus and can manage them appropriately. That's been on our mind, the idea that we could make that disaster worse by seeing a lot more transmission. So we've been in the works of making sure that we're able to respond that way. Hopefully we won't have to use these plans this year, but we are prepared if in that eventuality. So overall, the numbers this week are more encouraging. I do remind everyone not to become complacent. Our case numbers are still high, and we need to do what we can to continue to prevent the virus. And of course, that means keeping your distance from others and wearing your mask when you're in public and washing your hands often. And as always, there's more information available on our website, scdhec.gov/COVID-19. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kacka. Question comes from Kay, and Kay is mentioning the effective reproduction rate, the RT. And with South Carolina being at 0.90, could you talk a little bit about what that means?
So I haven't seen updated numbers. I do caution people when they look at the reproductive number. It's very prone to confounding factors. So when you have a reproduction number that's over 1, that means case numbers are increasing. So the reproduction number essentially is an estimate of how many people someone infected with the disease will go on to infect. So if the reproductive number is 2, one person sick with the disease will go on to infect 2 other people. When you get that reproductive number below 1, that means that you're not going to see increasing case counts because people are not infecting as many people. So if we do see that those changes in the reproductive number where we get it below 1, that's an estimate that we're not seeing an increase in our case numbers.
Dr. Kacka, thank you, and we appreciate each week you being on and giving our listeners an update. We'll look forward to doing it again next week, hopefully. So thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Staying safe together remains an important motto for all of us, and your chamber wants you to know we continue to pass out masks with our mask distribution program. We were at 3 different locations this week, and we'll continue this Saturday evening in Bluffton at Southern Barrel Brewing Company for the Saturday night market. As a reminder, be kind, stay safe, and wear your mask, and hope everyone has a great rest of your week. Thanks for joining us this morning.